by the way, that statement from J.D. Vance, the one that we just read, take note of what he said down toward the end there. So I want you to watch this and just listen very closely to what Brian Harpole says here.
I can't remember who it was, but I knew. I was like, we're not going to turn this into some JFK. I specifically asked one of the doctors, I don't know, I remember what she looked like, dark skin, like dark hair, probably 35, 40 years old. I said, how long until we can get an autopsy? And I remember her saying a day and a half. And I was like, oh. And so, I mean, she's the boss of that. That's just information. And so I remember, I was like, man, that's a long time. We need to get this autopsy done and done right, so that there's not some conspiracy. So, I mean, you're starting to think forward to that. And
why are they thinking forward about a conspiracy? What are you talking about, bro? What are you talking about? Hold on.
I was like, man, that's a long time. I was like, oh. And so, I mean, she's the boss of that. That's just information. And so,
let me
an
run
autopsy. And I remember
one more time. Sorry, I keep back forwarding it. Let me run this.
To what Brian Harpole says here.
I can't remember who it was, but I knew. I was like, we're not going to turn this into some JFK.
We're not going to turn this into some JFK. Like, why would this come out of your mouth? We're not going to turn this into some JFK. Like, that is, why would somebody say that? Why would somebody say that? Like, forget about the cutting the shirt off. Forget about him jumping on top and directing and whatever Candace said. Forget about all that. Forget about the fact that he is obviously in charge of the doctors at this moment, according to him, and then steps away. But forget about all that for a sec. Why would he say, we're not going to make this a JFK situation, a conspiracy. We've got to be careful to not let that happen. No. No JFK here, sir.
I specifically asked one of the doctors, I don't know, I remember what she looked like, dark skin, like dark hair, probably 35, 40 years old. I said, how long until we can get an autopsy? And I remember her saying a day and a half. And I was like, oh. And so, I mean, she's the boss of that.
What do you mean? Oh, what's the rush, bro? You're in there. You're telling me that you're worried about your boss that just got shot in the neck, according to sources, public information. According to the federal narrative, the Fed slot, he was shot in the neck by a 30-06. And you are concerned that this is going to look like a JFK conspiracy assassination. That's another concern. That's one. Another one is what he just said here.
It's just information. And so, but how long until we can get an autopsy?
How long can we get until we get an autopsy? What's it to you, bro? That's not that. What? I don't know.
And I remember her.
I never heard this, I don't think.
Her saying a day and a half. And I was like, oh. And so, I mean, she's the boss of that. That's just information. And so I remember, I was like, man, that's a long time. We need to get this autopsy done and done right, so that there's not some conspiracy. So, I mean, you're starting to think forward to that. And
so he's saying, oh, he's acting like a day and a half is going to take too long. But then he's saying, we want this to be done right. And we don't, how many times did he say conspiracy? Let's run. I actually downloaded this transcript. I'm going to pull the transcript and I'm going to ask how many times was conspiracy said in this clip? Because I already pulled the transcript from the transcript of this video that you pulled the whisper file. How many times was the word conspiracy mentioned? This is that video thing I was telling you guys about yesterday, or the last live, Wednesday, I think. Wednesday or Thursday. Are there any things in here that seem psychological in a way that maybe he was involved? Day at UVU for Charlie Kirk, Brian Harpole. All right, I'm going to run that. So I said, follow from the transcript of the video that you pulled the whisper file. Whisper is like AI extracted, or like you can use AI to extract whisper for the transcript. How many times was the word conspiracy mentioned? And are there any things in here that seem psychological in a way that maybe he was involved more than he leads on? This is head of security that day at UVU for Charlie Kirk, Brian Harpole. So we'll see. It's good to have this thing, I'll tell you that.
So I remember I was standing next to the chief of staff and the vice president called. And the vice president asked him,
So this is where the vice president gets involved, allegedly.
what do you conspiracy? So, I mean, you're starting to think forward to that. And so I remember I was standing next to the chief of staff and the vice president called. And the vice president asked him, what do you need? And then he looked at me and said, what do we need? And I said, we need an autopsy now.
What?
So for these people that are saying there wasn't one done,
We need an autopsy now. Well, why? Everyone knew that Tyler Robinson apparently was the shooter, and it was a 30-06. I mean, what is the hurry on the autopsy? Let's see what it says. It says word count. Still thinking here. Let me find the Whisper file. 1 second. Sorry about this. Whisper. Transcribe. Fort Huachuca. Here it is. Right here. Full. There it is. All right. So
go away. It was done. It was done. Do it for you. Yeah. Get the report when it comes out. It was done. It was done. Yeah. In the
and what did he say about Vice President J.D. Vance?
So for these people that are saying asked so that there's not some conspiracy. So, I mean, you're starting to think forward to that. And so I remember I was standing next to the chief of staff and the vice president called. And the vice president asked him, what do you need?
The vice president called Charlie Kirk's chief of staff, and he said, what do you need?
And then he looked at me and said, what do we need? And I said, we need an autopsy.
We need an autopsy. So if this is to be believed, then did J.D. Vance, is that why J.D. Vance came to get the body, is to do an autopsy, actually but why fake an autopsy? Like, what is going on with this autopsy?
Now, so for these people that are saying there wasn't one done, go away. It was done. It was done. Do it for you. Yeah.
Do it for you.
Get the report when it comes out. It was done.
We can't. I don't think we can.
It was done. Yeah. In the OR doc released statements regarding, and there has been statements regarding the bullet and the travel.
I mean, that's news to me. That's news to the entire world, actually, which is exactly why it seems that Brian Harpole tried to gaslight everyone out there who has heard from members of Turning Point USA themselves that there was no autopsy of Charlie Kirk. We all heard the police radio traffic. It was determined, according to Andrew Kolvet, that Charlie Kirk had neck bones of steel, and then his body was loaded onto Air Force Two and taken away, flying around the country with the vice president of the United States, never to be seen again. But that's not what Brian Harpole says. He says that there was an autopsy. Now, we'll never know what J.D. Vance truly said when he made that phone call to Utah, but whatever it was, it's clear that it ended in J.D. Vance taking custody of Charlie Kirk's body.
Exactly. What is that? If Brian Harpole is getting a call from J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, we need an autopsy. A day to a day and a half wasn't fast enough for Brian Harpole for an autopsy. It wasn't fast enough. In fact, the vice president had to apparently fly out to get this autopsy done for them. Apparently. I guess that's the pieces I'm trying to put together.
Autopsy or no autopsy. J.D. Vance ran the disposal job.
A few moments later.
He had to get his hands dirty, which only makes sense when you can.
What's crazy is J.D. Vance, weren't they friends, him and Charlie? Where's Don Jr.? Weren't they friends, him and Charlie? Where's Donald Trump? Weren't they friends, him and Charlie? Where are all the people that were his friends? The only person that claims to be his friend is acting like it is Candace Owens. You've got people speaking out from Turning Point USA for all kinds of reasons. All kinds of reasons. I just showed you last week that somebody was able to get a 95-year-old dying man's $25 million estate taken from his grandson and given to Turning Point USA and Young American Federation or Foundation, YAF. This scares me because when you have people taking property for a nonprofit, that's where I start understanding, oh, that's how $500 billion in donations goes to nonprofits every year. How many people in their 90s are on their deathbed are signing over their entire wealth for their bloodline over to some nonprofit that's flying on private jets? Charlie Strickland, Alton Jennings' grandson, 20 years old, was in his will and trust from 2012. And in 134 days before his grandfather died, they made an amendment to the trust, removed Charlie Strickland, the grandson, and changed it to Turning Point Action and YAF and Mitch Manley Sr. You know the cameraman that was just interviewed, Mitch Manley, that was interviewed by Black Line Brief? His father was the caregiver for Alton Jennings. And sometime after Alton Jennings started being taken care of by this caregiver of Mitch Manley Sr., somehow Turning Point USA gets to split a $25 million inheritance with another 501c3, and then the rest goes to Alton Jennings' caregiver instead of his grandson. There's a lot of things. If you go back to the beginning of me talking about Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, you'll understand why people are saying that Charlie was scared he was going to go to jail, prison. There was an investigation. There's a lot going on here behind the scenes. There's a lot. Now, let's jump over. Go watch the rest of Stu Peters. Shout out to him. We only played about 11 minutes of it. Let me see if there's any. I haven't even watched the whole thing, but I don't think there's. Oh, yeah, he does talk about the Google searches and stuff. And he talks about, here, let me pull this up here.
To Fort Huachuca, just as is Andrew Kolvet.
So he's tying Jacob Recess, Vice President J.D. Vance's secretary, to this SAM Flight 702. And I believe it's from Anna's research.
On base comes flying into the area somehow, some way. Repeatedly from Fort Huachuca in the run-up to Charlie Kirk's death, as we have covered here, as Fort Huachuca became the site of meetings and demonstrations and last-minute preparations and briefings before some kind of an operation went hot in the immediate proximity of Charlie Kirk's death. And Jacob Recess is now directly tied to Fort Huachuca, just as is Andrew Kolvet. J.D. Vance's chief of staff is directly tied to Fort Huachuca 2 days before Charlie Kirk's death.
Okay, now he's saying this. So I want to see where he goes with this and how he ties this, and I'll play probably another 4 or 5 minutes max. I want to see how he does, because I'm going to show you something else that Baron Coleman says from his grandma request.
Was he on SAM Flight 702? Was he on SAM 702 on the 9th? Now, all of that makes what I'm about to tell you a whole lot more interesting. Just last month, Jacob Recess announced his resignation.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Now, he does plan to stay in his position until September, almost a year to the day after Charlie Kirk's death. When Recess announced this departure, J.D. Vance issued a public statement. Where is it here? Quote, Jacob has been by my side for my whole career in public life. I can't imagine having been on this life-changing journey without him. From day one of my time as a senator-elect, I could not have asked for a more loyal and discerning advisor and friend as my chief of staff. I'll miss him dearly, but he won't be far, and I plan to keep his counsel close until our paths cross again. End quote. Look at him. Look at that guy.
I don't like judging a book by its cover, but something about that look, that 1,000-mile stare. Have you seen that? Do you know what that looks like? That 1,000-mile stare is? Do you know what the 1,000-mile stare is? Let me show you something. I'm going to show you something. So when we played baseball, or when we were like, whatever, when you're like super tired, 1,000-mile stare, downloads. Here, watch this. I'm going to zoom in on his face because I want you to see what I'm talking about. Where'd it go? Here it is. This right here. This is the face of someone that does not look happy. It's like, this is a face of someone that doesn't look happy. I don't know how to say it. There's something concerning here. Now, that quote was originally given to NBC News. It was run in multiple corporate media outlets, including Israeli corporate media outlets. No surprise there. They're all Israeli corporate media outlets, to be honest with you. And outside of that, we really don't have any explanation as to why Recess has decided to pack it up and leave. Now, at this point, as far as we know, Jacob Recess is still employed as J.D. Vance's chief of staff. There's no public accounting for where he was on September 8th and September 9th. Apparently, he's going to be replaced by Nick Luna, a Kushner-connected creature of both Trump administrations, who's also served as a member of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. Shocking, I know. I wanted to tell you what my AI said. Because the conspiracy question was kind of, the frame wasn't long enough, so it pivoted. Now it says it doesn't want to, apply guilt to Brian Harpole. I'll just read what it says. Contradiction. The real version. It says this. Let me just read it out loud here. So it says, I'll do this part because is he contradicting himself? I asked if he's contradicting or if he is involved or if he psychologically, can you profile these questions? And it says, I can't remember who it was, but I knew. We're talking about Brian Harpole. I can't remember who it was. When he's talking to Shawn Ryan, he says this. I don't know. I remember what she looked like. Dark skin, like dark hair, probably 35, 40. This is how people genuinely talk while reconstructing a chaotic day. So I wouldn't lean on that, but a hostile interviewer would, and it wasn't taken advantage of. Now, he sees the chief of staff and never says whose. So there's a lot of things here. I'd like to do more research. I don't want to dig too deep in that. Like I said, I'm still working on it, but let's keep going on what Stu has to say here, and then I'm going to switch to another clip of Barron.
And by the way, that statement from J.D. Vance, the one that we just read, take note of what he said down toward the end there. The paths of J.D. Vance and Jacob Recess will cross again, and they will really never diverge. Jacob Recess won't be too far away, says J.D. Vance. And that makes perfect sense because Jacob Recess isn't the type of guy to ever be really far away. Actually, his entire life, he has been wrapped up one way or another in this country's political system as an unelected, completely unasked for appendage of elected officials, dating all the way back to when he was a high school student.
Okay, so maybe Jacob Recess needs some looking into. So now we're going to jump over to Baron Coleman.